kind of said, Sagar and I are really leaning into SPCA's theme of wildlife communities near and far this year. So I'll be starting off talking about a really close by wildlife community in the Baraboo Hills, just up the road. And then Sagar will talk about a wildlife community in South India. Everyone can hear me okay? Yeah. Great. So since 2021, I've been studying oak woodlands in the Baraboo Hills as part of my PhD at UW-Madison, and I work with Dr. Anna Pigeon in the Silvis Lab. And I think that probably a lot of you as conservationists and people who care about the Sauk Prairie definitely would agree that any kind of restoration work right now feels like one of the more hopeful things that we can be doing as we keep hearing about really negative environmental news. So yeah, I really have had a great time with this project, and there's a ton of stuff I could have included tonight. But I decided to just kind of keep it at more of an overview level and highlight a few things that are interesting to know about the restoration science that I've been studying. And not to oversimplify this too much, but I'm really lucky to work in a place where there have been decades of really strong conservation work. And so we have a ton of land protected. You have views like this where you see just kind of uninterrupted forest. And so we're able to think about more detailed questions like restoring the natural disturbance regime to this place. And Sagar will be talking about a place where still conserving land is like the most important thing. I also am really lucky to work in a place where a lot of people have done some great ecology work before me. And so I kind of came into this project that the Nature Conservancy has been working on to restore their land after it had already been started. Mike Mossman has been doing bird surveys in some of these same places before I started, so it's great to kind of compare notes. And this summer I had a lot of fun looking at Ken Lange's plant surveys from some of my sites in the 1990s. So yeah, really fun place to study. And oak woodlands, this is probably not something that's super new to this group, but they're a fire-dependent habitat, a ton of biodiversity. These are all different scenes I've come across in the past 3 summers working in the hills. And open woodland ecosystems like that used to cover the entire eastern United States for the most part, with a few exceptions. And some of you might remember a few years ago, David Mladenoff came and gave a talk for SPCA about how he and his lab have pieced together a lot of historical data to recreate these past land cover maps of Wisconsin. So if we look at that first map, mid-1800s, we can see that most of southern Wisconsin was a mix of prairie and forest, and small patches of forest, but pretty open habitats. And then fast forwarding to the 1990s and on to today, a lot of that kind of savanna, open habitat is gone and replaced by either dense forests or cropland. That's due to a lot of land use changes, but also fire suppression, which replaces open woodland scenes like this, where a lot of biodiversity is in the ground layer, like the shooting star plant, with really dense situations where the understory shades out the grounds layer. And you can kind of see just like the drastic loss of species diversity in those pictures. And so oak woodland restoration is pretty common now. There's a variety of different methods. The picture of the tree being cut, that's at a Nature Conservancy property a few years ago. And then I really like this picture of a controlled burn. Partially it's on Mark and Janelle Valerin's property. It's one of my study sites. It's located like just on the other side of the hill from there. But it also shows how low intensity these burns can be. And so I kind of came into the situation where the Nature Conservancy was managing several really large areas of their preserve for its open woodland conditions. And so I compared places that were and were not managed to answer some questions about temperate forest food webs in response to management. So I was curious especially about arthropod biomass and how that influences bird communities and how that can influence then the soundscape. These are my study sites in the southwest corner of the Baraboo Hills, so a lot of badgers kind of like down in that corner just off the map. My study sites are paired, so every orange site that's managed has a really similar blue site that's unmanaged. And there's a lot of ways I could describe this very scientifically about how the vegetation has changed after management, but I think a visual gives us a better idea of this. The kind of path you see going through the middle of this picture is a burn break. So everything on this side has all been managed. The canopy becomes more open, there's less trees in the mid-story and the understory. We're kind of, as management happens, they're favoring oak trees, so the composition of tree species favors oaks quite a bit. And because of all of these different changes, across the Baraboo Hills, we are seeing a really big increase in herbaceous plant species, so the flowering plants that we think about our pollinators wanting to have. I'll always use this brown color for managed sites throughout tonight, and this blue color for unmanaged. And the way to interpret this plot is that in unmanaged upland sites, there's about 30 species of plants across a 5 to 7 hectare site. And then in a comparable managed site, this number is up by 70 to 80. So really big differences in the biodiversity. And so we wondered how this would influence the arthropod community. Aerial arthropod biomass is a really important source of food for like bats, songbirds. You could think about eastern wood pewee is a common forest bird that's insectivorous. So we use these malaise traps to catch insects. This works as a flight intercept path, so an insect would kind of bump up against that middle panel of the trap. They're pretty big, they're about this tall, and then be funneled up into a collection jar at the top. So my field techs and I actually weighed arthropod biomass every 10 days all summer for 2 years. And we found that, indeed, flying insect biomass is higher after management than in unmanaged sites. And this is about a 33% increase. So pretty significant. The other part of insect biomass that's really important, especially for temperate forest birds, is caterpillar biomass. And we kind of hypothesized that management that favors oak trees would also favor caterpillars, because a lot of caterpillar diversity can be found on oak trees. And actually, in the eastern US, this study is a little bit out of date now, but there's over 550 species of caterpillars that live on oak trees. So really important, kind of a foundational species to our woodlands here. And so to understand how caterpillar biomass is changing between these two management types, my field techs and I did branch samples. So we counted all the invertebrates on a 50-leaf area of a bunch of different kinds of trees. And this was a non-destructive sampling method, so we actually weighed or measured every insect we found, and then used equations developed by entomologists to figure out about how much biomass there was. And we submitted all of our data to Caterpillars Count, which is a great community science program that I'd highly recommend checking out if you're curious about just caterpillar phenology and abundance throughout the eastern US. You can do a lot of like data exploration, or if you maybe have like an area of habitat that you're monitoring and you're curious about the insect resources there. And then, so we did all of these surveys over the past 3 years, so 2021 until this fall. And we did actually find that caterpillar biomass is a lot higher after management. I realize this figure is a little bit tough, so a few things going on, but on the x-axis here on the bottom, you can see the dates. And so right around late May, early June is when the peak in caterpillar biomass occurs in the Baraboo Hills, which is pretty much in line with other temperate forests. And this is really important, as you might imagine. It's timed really well to bird nesting season. And this picture looks pretty simple at this level, but if we break it down into each year of my study, for the past 3 years, you'll see that there's a really different story happening. In 2021, we actually had a caterpillar outbreak here, and so there were 2 species, elm spanworm and maple spanworm, that were like hyper abundant and actually defoliated a few study sites. So that's this really strong peak in abundance here. We think 2022 was like about normal, from what we can tell. And then 2023, you probably remember there was a really severe drought throughout Sauk County that started in early June. And so you'll see that the caterpillar biomass in managed or unmanaged sites was pretty close to 0 throughout the entire summer. And there's a few takeaways about having this much variation in a 3-year study. One is that the insectivorous bird species that make up 96% of the bird species in Wisconsin, so most of what we see, are facing a really variable food landscape that we sometimes might not notice, just kind of on first glance at a forest. Also, in general, even though you can't see it too well in this figure, if we look at each one of those sets of paired study sites that I mentioned at the beginning, you will see more arthropod biomass in the managed site than the unmanaged site. And then third, there are a few constants that we can look at that would stay the same between years. And one of those is which tree species caterpillars are more likely to be found on. And as we had kind of predicted, oaks are really important for caterpillar biomass in this study site. So white oak followed by red oak were the best caterpillar habitat, followed by shagbark hickory and American basswood. So kind of keep in mind those 4 species. And then everything else of all the other tree species we encountered and sampled, there was significantly less caterpillar biomass there. We repeated the same study for shrub species in the understory and found that American witch hazel had the highest biomass, followed by prickly ash had the lowest. And those were significant. Yeah.
So I saw this ash was your number 5 species. What's the condition of ash in our forest? I mean, with emerald or?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Would it have been different 10 years ago?
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. So, of course, emerald ash borer is kind of going through all of our sites. I first started noticing it a lot in my sites in 2021, so right when the study started. And it seems like the pattern was it kind of killed a lot of larger ash trees, so the canopy trees. But I was sampling caterpillars from what I could reach, so in the understory. But what we did notice is over the 3 years of this study, the ash trees in the understory had more caterpillar biomass every year. And so we're wondering if some species of caterpillars were kind of concentrated into the remaining ash. So, yeah. Yeah, that's a great question, though. There's a lot more going on than just these few slides here. But yeah, I think this part of the study is really exciting to me because it kind of shows that as a land restorationist or even someone just deciding what to plant in your backyard, we do kind of have the knowledge to shape food webs and really enhance habitat for species. So kind of revisiting my research questions, we see that management for open oak woodlands results in higher plant species richness, higher arthropod biomass, and then we can move on to how this might affect the bird community. And I looked at this in a few different ways. One way was just looking at how many different bird species were found in each site. So what was the bird richness of a site? All of the managed sites are shown in brown, and they're connected by that black line to their paired unmanaged site. And so we see that across the board, there's always higher bird richness after management. And this can come from a variety of different sources. So sometimes you might have a species like eastern bluebird or red-headed woodpecker that's really like an open woodland obligate species that comes back into a site when the conditions resemble open woodlands. We also might have something like brown thrasher coming into a site, and that's more of an early successional species, maybe even a forest edge species that's responding to the habitat. And then also we had in the Baraboo Hills one species, cerulean warbler, is really specialized, and they seem to be associated with uneven canopy structure and really large tree canopies that kind of stick out above the rest of the canopy. And so when we manage for open woodlands and we're favoring open-grown oak trees, we're kind of creating this habitat, even though it's maybe not exactly what we think about with open woodlands. But yeah, the ceruleans we're seeing a lot more in a few places, and that's really exciting because they're a threatened species in Wisconsin. I also looked at the density of some of the more common bird species, and this plot has a lot going on, so we'll kind of walk through one species up at the top there, American redstart, and that's also the picture over in the corner. That's a female redstart we banded a few years ago. So redstarts in unmanaged sites have 4.29 pairs per hectare. And so that's kind of the baseline abundance we're thinking about. After management, the difference in density in the bottom there shows us that there's about 5 more pairs of redstarts per hectare. So they're responding really positively to woodland management. I broke this down by kind of habitat association generally so that you can think about it in groups of birds rather than all at once. So American redstart is more of a forest generalist, so is American robin, and they both were more common in managed areas. We also have early successional species, kind of forest edge species, indigo bunting, eastern towhee, house wren, that were also more common in managed areas. And then this last group of birds, shown by the green dots, is mature forest species. And you can see there's a really wide range of responses here. So blue-gray gnatcatchers and eastern wood pewees were positive. There's also a whole line of species here that kind of had no response, were equally abundant in managed areas and outside of managed areas. And then all the way down at the bottom, you can see this group of species, Acadian flycatcher, ovenbird, and hooded warbler, that are less abundant in managed sites. And these are species that we think of as being associated with like really interior forest conditions, so closed canopy. Ovenbirds like to be kind of in the leaf litter, and so the year after a burn, they're almost never in a managed site. But you will see that these species are not entirely gone from management units. They might just take them a few years after a lot of management activity to come back. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I'm starting to see our scarlet tanager more often in, our two open-grown oak trees, so they would manage the savanna. And I used to think, I'm only going to find that, the densest part of the wood, but it seems like they're using more of that open habitat.
Yeah.
Expect.
Yeah, definitely. And so with my arthropod surveys, I haven't been able to really work on like canopy arthropod surveys yet, but I'm really curious how much they're responding to food differences versus the structure. Yeah. So yeah, we can kind of conclude that there's more bird species richness in managed areas and more abundance of quite a few species, but not all. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about from my research today is something called soundscapes. And as you might guess, a soundscape is the collection of all of the sounds in a landscape. So it could be animals, it could be a plane flying over, it could be like wind through trees. But most of what a forest soundscape is made up of in the temperate is bird calls, especially during the summer. So I use these bioacoustic audio recorders shown there to record all of the soundscapes in 24-hour cycles during the spring and summer in 2022. And once you've collected the soundscape data, it's a ton of data, and there's a lot you could do with it. You could look at like an individual species and try to pick out how often you hear it, or you could summarize something mathematically about the soundscape, which is what I did. I was looking at how complex a soundscape is, because complexity is really associated with how many bird species and what the bird abundance is at a site. So I calculated acoustic complexity index, which we can break down by looking at a low complexity recording. So this is taken from one of my long 24-hour recordings. Kilohertz on the side is frequency, so how high or low pitched a sound is. And then as you go across this recording, you'll see that little squiggle on the side around 623, and that's an American redstart call. That's what it looks like. But most of this recording, I would say, is pretty low complexity. There's not a lot going on. Compared to this one, where if you look really closely, you'll still see some of those American redstart calls, but now there's 5 or 6 other bird species calling too, and it's much more complex. So we could assign this minute here an ACI value, an acoustic complexity index value, of 0.1, and then say this is more complex and that one is even more complex on that side. So I did all of these calculations for all my sites across the spring and summer, and then came up with this figure that shows the seasonality of acoustic complexity. And this line up here, this kind of brown color, this is from managed sites, and then the blue color is unmanaged. So the solid line that goes all the way across is the mean value for every day, and then the vertical line in the back is the range. And there's a few things about this. Like right away we can see that for most of the spring and summer, managed sites have a more complex soundscape than unmanaged. We also see the seasonality come into focus a little bit. So if we highlight this part here, in June, this aligns with kind of the heart of bird nesting season. So this is like the peak of the soundscape for the year. This is the loudest and most complex the forest will sound. And we can see that there's another little peak after that in July, maybe with birds' second nesting or fledging period. And we also see these peaks are still here for the unmanaged site, but they're a lot lower. It's kind of dampened a little bit.
Yeah, I noticed a little battery noise. I don't want to take any chances here. Excuse me. I think I have the sound on.
Yeah. Good catch. Great. Speaking of sound. Right. So overall, with our soundscapes, we see that in managed sites, there is this higher complexity and stronger seasonality. And just thinking kind of overall about southern Wisconsin, restoring these patches of managed oak woodland habitat, we have this increased plant richness, arthropod biomass, bird species richness, and complex soundscapes, which is a really important part of our southern Wisconsin biodiversity. I do want to mention, though, that this is all fitting into a PhD time frame, which is about 3 years, and obviously that's not exactly how woodlands work. And so I just wanted to mention a long-term project that I'm working on starting as my PhD is wrapping up to kind of monitor more closely the bird community. And we do this through banding. 4 of our sites are part of the Institute for Bird Populations MAPS program, which is all about monitoring avian populations. So we're working to capture birds, put these bands on, and release them back into their habitat. And as we do this, we can get some pretty detailed population estimates. This takes a couple years to get data for, so I won't be talking about it tonight. Just to say that we're hoping to continue this as a small nonprofit going forward. And it definitely takes a really dedicated crew to do bird banding. So I work with a team of avian ecologists and other PhD students. And yeah, definitely reach out if you're interested in learning more. And being in Sauk County, I think we see a lot of really great examples of nonprofits doing this important conservation work. So as we move into the next part of our talk, and I switch places with Sagar, and we start thinking about this wildlife community that's very different from southern Wisconsin, like about as different as you could possibly get. I think that the common thread between these two has a lot to do with these small, dedicated, on-the-ground NGOs. So you might hear something familiar coming up.
Would it be possible to take a few questions now, just as you switch?
Yeah.
A couple?
Yeah, we could.
So folks don't have to remember all the talks
Nice.
at once.
Yeah.
We go back to your complexity curve. I'm just wondering,
Yes.
was the y-axis normalized with respect to like the overall sound, the number of birds? Because you had more birds in the managed site. Is that, so was it normalized to the approximate total sound, if that makes sense?
Yeah, wow, detailed question right off the bat. No, that's great. Actually, so what we're interested in capturing with the ACI is a lot that has to do with how many birds there are. And so it's not corrected at all, but we, through bird surveys done like at the same time as these recordings, we can see that the recording is reflecting that bird abundance. So,
Got it. So that shift might actually be you have more number of species that might be mating at a different time, maybe a little later or something.
yeah, like definitely there could be a lot of different things going on. We usually think with complexity about just more bird calls happening of more bird species, so kind of that combination.
So now I've got an idea you can make money off of, work with every real estate agent, and as part of when they're selling houses, offer if it's a positive soundscape.
It's a good backup plan.
You're talking
Yeah.
and charge them to keep it
Yeah.
that way.
And your managed landscapes, how much of that understory is invasive plants?
Oh, so not too much. Just because I'm working in nature conservancy sites, and so they do a lot of work to kind of clear out invasives, even in their unmanaged areas. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah.
You talk about the local diversity that increases with the management versus the impact of that on the bigger biodiversity of the region.
Yeah.
Because we can have a lot of diversity in the local area and still be eliminating those species that are the rarest.
Yeah, that's a great point. So yeah, I kind of mentioned like some of the species that were contributing to this species richness increase or abundance of birds, or species like gray catbirds suddenly move into managed sites. And so that technically for my little like 5-hectare place is one more species, but like across the broader landscape in the Baraboo Hills, we have an opportunity to conserve interior forest bird species because this is one of their last strongholds. And so you really shouldn't get too hung up on like this one more species for species richness at the expense of other species. But on the same, kind of the other side of the coin is like if we lose our patches of open woodlands, we could be losing some bird species in the wider landscape too. Yeah, and if there's more questions later on, feel free.
Okay. It's going to be a
proper switch. Thank you, Maya, for that wonderful talk, and thank you, Grace, for this opportunity. Well, as an introduction, I'm doing my PhD with Professor Zuzana Burivalova, and I study tropical forest biodiversity. Please check my lab website to know more about my research and also our lab's really cool research. And I moved here from Chikmagaluru, a small hilly town, almost exactly 3 years ago. So, yeah, well, getting back to today's topic, this is a story of a team of passionate, volunteer-driven, on-ground local conservationists from my home, which is a bit difficult to pronounce, is Chikmagaluru. The team is a big part of my life and essentially the main reason why I'm able to pursue my career as a wildlife ecologist and why I'm kind of here talking to you about this conservation work. I thought a lot about how I'm going to kind of say this story to everyone because there are so many people here in the story who have dedicated their lives, their entire career to protect this landscape. So I'll be referring to my notes more than Maya so that I don't miss certain things and also I clearly give you a perspective as someone who grew up there. So I'm really grateful to share this story tonight. Yeah, Indian subcontinent is a land of many vibrant colors and forms, everything from beautiful temples to Bollywood. And such diversity is also reflected in the species that we have, all the way from snow leopards in the Himalayan mountains and to these really tiny endemic frogs called Dattatreya night frogs in one valley in one part of Western Ghats. However, with more than 1.4 billion people living all crammed up in a small area, the subcontinent has seen a lot of changes over the years, and most of the region is under heavy anthropogenic pressures, and we only have less than 3% of our land protected under protected areas. The region I'll be focusing here today belongs to Karnataka state, which is in the southwest part of the India under the black box. Part of the landscape of focus for today also has these Western Ghats mountains. This is a tropical mountain biodiversity hotspot, which is really under critical condition. It's a spectacular landscape that is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. That's actually a picture from my home, and it has extremely high endemism, vascular plants, birds, and amphibians. Lowland parts of the southeastern part of the Western Ghats also has some of the highest density of tigers and elephants in the world. So focusing a bit further, it's such a large landscape, is the region that we'll be talking about today lies within the political boundary of Chikmagaluru district within the state. In area, Chikmagaluru is about 3 times that of the Sauk. The ecosystem drastically changes from the east to the west based on the gradient of rainfall that we get, governed by the Western Ghats mountains to the western edge of the wide boundary that we see. The change in ecosystem is also reflected by the agro-ecosystems that actually present in the region. Our landscape is a mosaic of multiple protected areas, all shown here in like multiple colors that we have. And due to this, this is primarily due to a rich history of conservation, due to a complementary work by Karnataka Forest Department, which is a wing of the government, and also on-ground local NGOs. And I was born here in that red circle area to a region that is dominated by shade-grown coffee. And yes, we do grow coffee, and we have a very rich history and culture surround coffee. Just a bit of kind of overview of the landscape and species that we have. As I said, the eastern, more drier part has species like this Indian wolves and blackbucks, because the area is more dominated by thorny scrublands and more of open grassland systems. And the central region, which is like dominated by dry to moist deciduous forest, has supports one of the largest concentration of megafauna, what we call, of the Indian subcontinent, like this gaur, which is the largest bovine in the world. And to be able to see spectacles like this, like a large wild herd of Asiatic elephants. And to the west, as we move, the elevation changes, and this gives rise to more of a rainfall area where it's evergreen forest, and we see species like this really point endemic Nilgiri martens, spectacular species. I still haven't seen them. And also, really cool species like the king cobra. And probably one of my favorite species in our landscape is something called a lion-tailed macaque, eating a jackfruit, which is a squishier version of a jackfruit that we call in Kannada called biluva. But to summarize, geographically, Chikmagalur is extremely diverse in species. And I have to note that while I'm referring to species within this political boundary that we are kind of talking today, they spread beyond any of these political boundaries. But just to kind of give a focus on where we work and where our conservation works, we just want to kind of mention one kind of arbitrary political boundary that I am explaining today. With lots of diverse ecosystems, of course, we have a lot of conservation issues, everything from senseless infrastructure development to wildlife poaching. And this is when I think we have to introduce our team. Despite the presence of government agencies in the land, and all of us can agree on one thing, that it is extremely important to have on-ground passionate conservationists who kind of be a watchdog to see what's happening in the landscape. And I strongly believe that the conservation in the landscape and all the presence of the species in our area would not have been possible without the work of these two major NGOs. Just I'll take some time to kind of go through this, who they are, what they're doing. Bhadra Wildlife Conservation Trust, BWCT, is one, and the second one is Wildlife Conservation Action Team Chikmagaluru, WildCAT-C. Both these NGOs work in unison, with the older BWCT often takes up a mentorship role to guide the members of the younger WildCAT-C, younger mostly in age, and a lot more in passion. Sorry. No, I mean, it's like two sides of the same coin. So. We do not have a membership fee at all, and all participation is voluntary. It's a very tight-knit community where we are kind of closer to each other than our blood relations and family. We're also coming from all walks of life, from students to engineers to merchants to farmers, everyone. Most members are below 40 years of age, and nearly 30% are women. In a rural part of India, which is historically patriarchal, and having a group that's voluntary, and still, despite that having such a big, women in the group, is something I think is a big accomplishment. And that goes to say the kind of work that our mentors have been doing to get these kind of community running. With over 35 years of combined experience, our team have been involved in multiple conservation battles. Today I want to highlight two main projects. They both kind of showed two different aspects of it, one very older one younger, like a more recent one that I have been involved in. I think this quote from Margaret Mead, I think a lot of people here are familiar, but also really summarizes our team, and there is never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. If you have not already guessed, I'm really, really proud to be part of our team, so sorry. One of the first monumental conservation work done by our team was voluntary resettlement of families from within Bhadra Tiger Reserve. Okay, I understand this is a very sensitive and controversial topic that usually has associations with negative connotations, but as someone who grew up in the community, knowing on both the sides of the topic, knowing the people who are inside, who are resettled, and also people who made this happen, I'd just like to give you a local perspective and just hear me out for a second and see what actually has happened. The location of the targeted thing is the blue line area, which is Bhadra Tiger Reserve. It is around 600 square kilometers. Just to give you the context of what was before the resettlement happened, before resettlement, nearly 464 families in 13 villages lived inside the protected area, making wildlife protection in this landscape a bit difficult because it was much more open. There were lots of socioeconomic issues, such as villagers did not have reliable roads, hospitals, schools, and electricity. Many people living inside were landless laborers who had no other choice but to work in farms of people who were landlords, in landlords' terms. So it was much more complicated than we can assume. The crop loss to wildlife was inevitable. There's no other way. Wildlife was also in danger due to people. There was rampant poaching, illegal logging, and a lot of forest fires. Fires in tropical forests is a no-no. It's very different than forest that is adapted to forest fires here. This short documentary titled Voluntary Resettlement, a Win-Win Solution kind of explains the complex issue really well. You can access it through YouTube, and I can give the information also later. Here's a scene from the documentary where the older couple living inside the village describe how difficult it is at their life. The man can't really see, and the woman can't really hear properly, and they are just by themselves. And they share the landscape with top predators like leopards. So, which is a recipe for conflict. Amidst all of these issues, villagers requested for resettlement, if not for modern amenities. This led to the start of the resettlement effort, right? The project was a combined effort with multiple departments within the government joining hands with local NGOs. Just have to stress, locally the resettlement project was spearheaded by my mentor, an amazing person. His name is D.V. Girish, here seen on the left on his Jeep. The picture on the left, you can see him. He really bridged the gap between the government officials and the people on the power with the local communities. I cannot stress enough what important role he made, because he literally, even before the negotiations were started, he knew everybody who was living inside by their names, and he had a personal rapport with them because he truly believed what this project can accomplish in the future, and he wanted good for both wildlife and people, and that leadership was I think the most important thing in this project. So by the end of 2003, after more than 20 years of planning and working in this landscape, 13 villages resettled with land even for landless people outside the park. And these land that was given to the people who were villagers outside were all irrigated land, meaning that they could cultivate in their own land and not depend on somebody else's. Over the past few years, this has led to a monumental change in the population of wildlife inside the park, and also there has been socioeconomic surveys to understand whether it has changed the perspective and lives of people. For example, here's a family of Ramchandra. He was one of the people who moved out of the park. Both his daughters now go to school and they can have education, and one of them is actually a renowned athlete. This wouldn't have been possible inside the forest where there were no schools and they had to go walk 15 to 20 kilometers in a non-monsoon dry season, because monsoon they would be just cut off, and it would have been almost impossible. Vast numbers of research have been documented on the socio-economic and ecological impact of the project, and over the years the project has come to know as the gold standard for how a resettlement project can be done in a very sensitive area like tropical forest ecosystems with a lot of population of people. Nearly 2 decades later, we're still keeping contact with the resettled villages. Here's a picture of one of my recent visit before coming here to one of the resettled place where they invited us to kind of go and see them and meet them, and had named their new village as Bhadra Nagara. Bhadra is the forest where they were resettled one, so they just still wanted to have that name in their village. So they said, this is the village of the Bhadra. It's kind of nice, Many of the times you do a conservation work, you just forget about them. But because we are from that place, we still have, keep in touch with them. Well, that was kind of a big project that was done. And the second I would like to talk about is halting the 6-lane highway being built through a super sensitive ecoregion. This is one of the more recent battles found, and I was fortunate to be part of this project personally. At this time, I had just returned home after finishing my master's from UK, and I was able to contribute to the projects with my new applied skills, like everything from GIS analysis and R, simple writing, and doing a review process. This would be a kind of a quick overview without a lot of details in it. So initially we found out that a 223-kilometer new 6-lane highway was being built, was being planned to be built, shown here in the red in the map, which was almost kind of useless because you already see that there are multiple other national highways, NH73 and NH75, going through, connecting these two areas, going through the kind of a cards from the high elevation to the low elevation to the place called Bantwal, B-N-T-W-A-L, to the left, which is the coast. So it is not really necessary for a new highway. But as you can see, there was a lot of money involved, and that kind of gave a lot of people a kind of a positive attitude towards, oh, it would be nice to kind of have a road in these regions. And I would like to say that most of the people who also supported these were actually my relation. Because my mom comes from this place, so kind of I knew most of the people who said, we need a road. More like a 6-lane highway, but still, but yeah. I would like to stress that the 69-kilometer stretch that was going through a patch where there was no road at all. Like there was nothing. There was a small kind of a patch. And okay, and then in 2019 we filed a lawsuit against the highway to be built. We also supported our petition with scientific evidence showing flaws in the project plan and its impact on wildlife and socio-economic costs that it might have. We also published our findings in a peer-reviewed journal called Highway to the Hell.
Very subtle.
Yeah, very subtle. Such as how the project would be bisecting a forest patch and cutting across a notified tiger corridor between these two national protected areas. We also showed that the highway planned at the gradient would be going through areas susceptible to a lot of landslides during the monsoon season and would be cutting across a place that already has a very high human-wildlife conflict, which means that it will only worsen it in the future. So, and in 2021, we won the lawsuit and we have halted the project for now. And this is an image of the forest patch, where right now, if I would be talking without winning this, you would be seeing pictures of a 6-lane highway being built in that valley, which is kind of, you can't even imagine that. Anyway, we have won and lost many battles over the years, and these are just like some of the examples. And currently, some of the major issues that we are dealing with is, of course, impact of climate change in this landscape, and also unregulated ecotourism and human-wildlife conflict, particularly with elephants. As someone who grew up being part of the NGO since 2010, it shaped the way I see the world and also the wildlife and conservation. So the picture of me and my friend Pradeep is taken like 8 years apart with my mentor TV Girish, who we learned as to be a monumental figure in kind of changing the way we looked at conservation here and also helped in the Bhadra resettlement project. Now looking back from here where I started, I see how valuable it was that my mentor kind of took us under his wings and taught us how conservation is done from a very, very young age, and also taught us natural history at the same time. I would also say that most of the pictures that I use here are from Pradeep Hegde. He is now gone to be a renowned wildlife and conservation filmmaker. Teaching the next generation is also something that we take as a team very seriously, who make up, and the young people make up nearly half of our members. So this is also a quote that he says in various forms. Sorry, D.V. Girish, if you are looking at it, I might have paraphrased it more later. But conservation is like a marathon with batons. After a while, you need to pass on the baton to the next generation, but you're still in it for the long run because you don't know what's going to happen. So every year through multiple activities ranging from talks, nature walks to wildlife camps, we reach out to hundreds of students from primary school to colleges. in close collaboration with Karnataka Forest Department, who is the part of the government of India. And we hold multiple competitions too. We encourage our members also to be highly skilled naturalists, and because there's always so much more to learn in this landscape, and also it will be really valuable for us in the conservation advocacy. The accessibility to naturalist information through eBird and new portals have made it much easier. And now the top 9 of the 11 eBirders in Chikmagaluru, which has about 384 species, are all from our WildCAT-C volunteers, which are all like boxed here in the red. And except Maia and me, none of them are professional ecologists. Like 2 of them are dentists, one of them is an engineer, one of them is a merchant. But I always thought I was going to be the first person to see 300 species, but no. But it's amazing that they're doing that. So when I talk about the wildlife community of a faraway place to people like, to anybody, like in a place like Chikmagaluru, I think the picture would be almost incomplete without telling the story of the dedicated people who made that happen and to conserve these landscapes. This is exemplified by a quote by Dr. George B. Schaller, who studied in our department in forest and wildlife ecology, and who was known as like the most amazing field ecologist of the 20th century, and was instrumental in conservation in India. He says, "Science anyone can do, but the true love towards wildlife, it should come from the heart." And with that, I would like to thank all of these people who have supported our NGO and us over the years, and thank you very much for listening. And if you want to know more about our NGO and the work that we do, and please check our website and our Instagram and our Facebook. Thank you very much. Yes?
I think you said something about ecotourism, and was it that it's not really regulated, and so it sort of...
The landscape you saw is kind of protected in a lot of places, but most of these areas also have these coffee estates. It's shade-grown coffee, but you have this coffee at higher elevation, so it's almost from an aerial view, it just looks like forest. You also have these species inside them. What happened was, ecotourism, first of all, as you said, it's unregulated, so we don't have any regulations of how many things can be built, or should they be built close to the protected areas. How many rooms a homestay should have, or can they have a homestay without having a home before? Then it will be a resort. So we don't have any of these things. I mean, our NGO has been trying to saw that before 30 years ago, and wanted to change, but it's been 30 years, and we still do not have a proper regulatory kind of a document for the landscape. And the entire document is right there. I was involved in a project. We mapped the whole area. We said this is the area we can't do certain things. This is the area we can. But there's so much money involved. There's so much. Yeah, the government won't really enforce it. But what happened was, I can also see the other side. That the climate change is really, really making it very difficult for people to live off the land as being coffee farmers. So they need an alternative mode of income. And the best way to do is put up a small, if I have a 4-acre farm up in the hills, we want to build a small homestay and then have people coming there, because people will come and just see this landscape. But immediately the next thing that you see is these beautiful mosaic landscape that was before a corridor for elephants and tigers and birds. Now it's just small patches of people living in. And immediately shoots up the human-elephant conflict and whole sort of thing. So yeah, trying to deal with it, but it's very tricky because it's on private land. So then there is a whole concept of who can regulate private land, whether you can. So yeah, but just
Where is the tourists coming from?
So the biggest tourism that we have is actually an in-house tourist. The closest place would be Bangalore, which is like this kind of Silicon Valley of South Asia. We have huge community of new money in software that gave a big boom for people in Bangalore, so which is only 250 kilometers. And with beautiful 6-lane highway connecting us, which it is. So, I mean, they can reach there with a car in like 3.5 hours. So, it's nothing for them. You know, Friday evening they leave, Saturday, Sunday they are in this beautiful place, and Sunday night they will go back. So for them, it's just a weekend. Yeah. Some people do come for proper ecotourism, and I completely believe that ecotourism can make a big difference here. But if you don't regulate it, because I wish that all of you would come there and actually see the species. But, you know, but it's difficult, yeah.
So what you're describing is like all of Chicago, Illinois coming and invading Wisconsin on the weekends and going right back home.
Yeah,
But way more.
way more people.
Familiar thing?
Yeah. Seriously, like that, but you know, but in a densely populated area, like with over 1 billion people, it's just magnitudes higher.
Yeah, I saw that, yeah.
Yeah. With lots of Bollywood music. Blasting at like 10 o'clock at night. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah. Yeah. Oh, yes, sorry. Yeah.
Is there a land trust movement in India? Does it work like it does here?
Very good question. I don't know. I don't think so. I don't. I think I don't know whether we have such kind of tax benefits with respect to land trusts that it comes here. So most of the, and we also don't have a lot of private reserves, I should say. But another thing that we are planning to do is kind of, I think that's a good land trust, having land trusts and having a community who own private lands to be under kind of some kind of a trust is much better. That's why we are bringing kind of economics and trying to say, oh, maybe we can have a wildlife-friendly shade-grown coffee, or you know, you can have like a land sharing, land sparing. You spare about 50% of your land for something else because you can't really cultivate. Most of my generations, whose parents are farmers, are not farming, and so there is an opportunity, but there's a lot. I mean, yeah, we currently are trying to make a like economics-based model to our landscape. Let's see what's going to happen.
So do you have like basic zoning laws or things like that people have to pay attention to, or is it just, it's kind of a free-for-all?
There are laws, you know, it used to be very difficult for us to convert an agricultural land to a development land, right?
Okay.
But over the years, what has happened, they did something called like a one-window system. Before you have to go to Department of Forestry, Department of Water, Department of this, Department of that. But now they said, no, you just put one application, it goes through the whole thing, they fast-track the whole thing, and just says seal of approval, without an environmental impact assessment, without any, you know, because development is pushed more, progress is pushed more, so it's kind of, there are regulations there. I mean, you know, we have so much regulations. I mean, if all the regulations in Wildlife Protection Act in India is kind of laid out, which has worked, by the way, that's why we still have large predators living amongst us, which is a rarity even in countries, you know, like here. But certain times it doesn't really work. Yeah. Yes, please.
Sagar, you highlighted the voluntary relocation
Yes.
of folks
Yeah.
in the reserve, and I didn't quite catch. Does that reserve have a special like level of protection associated with it when people are relocated, or is it serving as like an ecotourism site that has some sort of self-inflicted regulation? Or?
So that was first it was a Bhadra Wildlife Sanctuary, and then it got a Tiger Reserve status. So it is protected under like the government of India, and it has its own money that comes in that gets managed through the Karnataka Forest Department. And it does have a tourism section where you have like the safaris that we go, you know, but a very small area of it. It's one of the very few places in India where there are no people living inside a protected area. It's a rarity. It's a rarity even in many of the countries to not have people living inside, and It's just, I can say it's spectacular all the time, but it is, truly is. I mean, we can ask Maya because she has been there.
And then it is like strictly protected. Like you can't go hiking there. You have to be like at a designated like tour of it. So yeah, very strictly protected.
So it's an exceptional case.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, it is. And also, almost every protected area in us has very similar regulations. Like even if people are living inside some of those areas, so only they can be there, but you can't walk in the protected area, you can't hike in the protected area. So it's almost what people would say like kind of a very strictly protected. Like when you say strictly, it is actually kind of strictly protected because it is difficult to manage a lot of people, I would say. I don't know whether backpacking like Yellowstone would be okay. With elephants, I'm not very sure. So, yeah.
Could you go back to the map and just indicate the dimensions again, how many kilometers across the area?
Oh, the whole thing?
Yes, the whole thing.
The whole thing is about, I think, it's about 3 times, about 7,000 square kilometers. I think I have it written.
Well, in the white area, isn't it like 3 Sauk counties?
Oh yeah, that's
Okay,
right.
that's what.
So yeah.
All right.
It's about 7,200 square kilometers. It's about 720,000 hectares, yeah.
That's the whole white.
The whole white area, yeah. So this blue area is about 600 square kilometers area where there are no people. Recently this new addition that happened, which increased, like almost doubled it, and a new conservation area that was happening here, which is a Western Conservation Reserve. This is like a crescent moon-shaped, beautiful like mountain that is there, and that kind of rain shadows the whole thing on the other side. Yeah, and this is another about 800 square kilometer high mountain evergreen rainforest. Yeah, it's pretty big, and we kind of, I mean, we're all like young volunteers, so on a day-to-day basis, we just wake up and say, oh, let's go to Sringeri or something like that. Okay, you just like take off and